I want to enjoy life. Like I want to enjoy my youth. I don't want to have kids super young and then like I want to travel. I want to be able to have money to do things. Like I think my 30s have been so fun and
Yeah.
so great. And I'm glad that I didn't have children yet, you know?
Well, we're just going to dive right into today's topic, which is all about fertility. And thank you so much for agreeing to come on here and share your journey with us. I think it's such an important topic for women to hear, like both men and women. So let's just start with some context for people listening. Where are you right now when it comes to wanting to be a mother? Have you decided? Have you explored any fertility options?
So I do want to be a mother, and I feel like that's a question that maybe like a couple of years ago I would have been like, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And sometimes I still feel like I don't know. But when I think of the future, like maybe 10 years from now, and I'm like, okay, would I be okay without having kids? Then I'm like, I don't know that I would be 100% comfortable. So I feel like that means I should have children. I've never been the type to really like dream of like marriage and kids. So it's really more of like, it's a real thought process. Like I really had to process whether I wanted to have kids or not.
Yeah.
But yes, ultimately, yes.
Okay, good. So you do want to be a mother. And so where are you in the process right now?
So I did start IVF last year and I have embryos that are frozen. So I'm married. So, you know, me and my husband have embryos that were frozen. So I did that first step, but I didn't want to rush the process and go straight from like doing the egg retrieval to transfer to being pregnant. So I did the first part and I'm taking a break because it is a lot.
Yeah. And what conversations did you have before you got married? And how did they sort of evolve even after you got married that got you to the point of, okay, let's do IVF? Or even just a conversation around like, do we want kids? How many kids? If we can't have kids, like how far are we willing to go to try and have kids?
So that's a good question because I've always felt like something was off, like fertility wise. I've always had that feeling, like even when I was a lot younger. So when I met my husband, I asked a lot of questions like, what if we couldn't have kids? Like, do you want kids? And yes, he wanted kids. He wasn't in a rush for kids, and neither was I. Like I was a lot younger. But he did say, I did ask him like whether or not he would be okay if I couldn't have kids. Like, what would he do then? And he, said that he would be fine, but he wanted kids. So if the option was to adopt, then he would want to do something like that. And at the time, I was just like, oh, okay. And that was it. I didn't really think really further into it. Um, but yeah, I think just getting on the same page of whether or not we would have kids and what it would look like if we couldn't have kids naturally was a conversation we had. But honestly, I felt like it was so far in the future that I really didn't talk too much about it outside of that.
Yeah. So I guess before getting married, it's just sort of like a preliminary conversation. Well, go as deep as you can, but like just make sure you're sort of in the same ballpark or on the same page, and then you can like maybe work out the details later.
Yeah, because you never know what can happen. And I think people change too. I think a lot of times people may say they want kids or they don't want kids, and then as time goes on, things change. So I think it's just kind of like getting a preliminary idea of where someone stands and then getting deeper into it when you feel like, okay, no, like if especially if this is something you really want, then yeah.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really thinking too much of it.
And I know we both watch Real Housewives. So there was this episode on Atlanta where Sonia, I think, was talking to Drew about how she really didn't want to have another kid. She already had one child. She really didn't want to have another one. She really struggled with the first child. And I think Drew's advice to her was like, I mean, he can't have kids. Like, you need to do what your husband wants, which I was very offended by that because Sonia was opening up to her about the struggles mentally and emotionally she felt. And
Yeah.
for it to just be like, I mean, your husband wants one, so you have to do another one. So, how do you feel about that in terms of sort of who gets to have more of a say in like deciding? Because I know it's both, you need two people to have a baby, biological wise, but it's like so much of the burden goes to the mom. Like, even if you have a partner who is like down for you, like gonna help take care of the baby, like he's there,
Mhm.
because you, it's just always gonna fall more on the mother and affects her career
Mhm.
more, her body, mental health, everything like that. So how can couples sort of balance that conversation where it's like maybe the mom wants one, the dad wants two? Mom, you know what I mean? Like, how can you balance it without being like, oh, well, I'm the woman, so it should be my choice?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you as far as the Real Housewives conversation. I did not like that
Yeah.
either. But I think that for me, as someone who has started the IVF process, although I don't have children yet, just the injections, the medication, going back and forth to the doctor every other day to get um, like very invasive checks. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I feel like it really should be the woman's decision if that's something that she wants to put herself through, whether it's natural, IVF, whatever. Like, it's a lot on you. It's a lot on you. And I don't think it's something you should do for someone else because I just can imagine the resentment. And what happens, like you said, it always falls more on the woman. What happens if things don't work out? Often relationships end. The man is always able to just leave. The
Yeah.
mom is always kind of left dealing with everything, more times than not. I'm sure there's times where the man is primary caretaker for his children, but I feel like it's just so much that you have to deal with mentally, physically, like you said, your career, like just so many things that you have to think about that it really needs to be a decision for yourself. And although I did take what my husband really wanted into consideration, really I had to think about whether or not I would be okay not having children and whether or not it was really something that I wanted to do because it's a lot for me.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot for me, and no matter how supportive he is or what he does, he's not the one actually physically going through it. So, yeah, I do think that it's something that you definitely should discuss and take in someone else's opinion into consideration, but ultimately, like, to put yourself through just like pregnancy, IVF, and then motherhood, if that's not something you really want, is not like the way to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so let's talk about the IVF process. How did you end up deciding to go that route? Had you had a period of trying to conceive naturally and then your doctor recommended IVF? So how did you get to that decision of starting that?
So, honestly, I did not really have a period of trying naturally. So, like I mentioned earlier, I always felt like something was a little off. So, when I was like 16, I started having cysts and like ovarian cysts, and I would actually feel it. Like, I would be in pain, and my mom, has taken me to gynecologist and they're like, oh, it's a cyst, it's normal, it'll go away on its own. And that happened repeatedly, like throughout my life since. And the last time that happened to me, where I actually was like in so much pain, I went to the doctor. I was dating my husband, so maybe like 6 years ago. I went to the gynecologist and I was like, I'm in a lot of pain. They did a whole sonogram, everything, and they're like, oh, everything is fine. And I knew, I'm like, there's no way. Like, I've felt this before. Like, I feel like something's wrong. They're like, no, everything is great, everything is fine, like it's normal to have pain. And I then went to urgent care because my husband, then boyfriend, was like, well, if you're in that much pain, like maybe it's something else, like you should go to urgent care. I went to urgent care and they were like, well, if you went to the gynecologist and they said it's nothing, then it could be like your appendix or something, you need to go to the emergency room. So I went to the emergency room only for them to do a sonogram and tell me it was a cyst. And I was just so frustrated that I felt like the doctors ignored me. They didn't take my pain seriously because maybe they thought it was a cyst and it's normal, like whatever.
Right.
And so I started searching for a doctor that not only would take me seriously, but like looked like me, like a woman of color, and would actually sit down and listen and care about my concerns.
Mm.
And I did find one. And I kind of like our first meeting, it was very conversational. I told her all of my concerns, and she was like, okay, let's figure it out. So we just started kind of testing for things. And she thought that I could have endometriosis just
Mm.
like based on like pain and things. But I didn't want to have an invasive surgery to find out. So we started with HSG, which is when they put like dye into your cervix to
Oh,
like go through your
yeah.
tubes, see if they're open. And one of my tubes was actually
Mm.
closed. Um, and that's the side that I always have cysts on, which is most likely where I always ovulate
Mm.
more from. So from there, I just knew it would be a lot harder to get pregnant. So I did try, and like deep down, I knew it wasn't going to work. So
Yeah.
we were trying, but it didn't work for like a few months. And my doctor was like very specific on when to and when you need to try.
Yeah.
And it didn't work. So then from there, I just started speaking to like specialists, and I figured based on my age, although I think at the time I was like 33,
Hmm.
I was like, maybe it's better to just freeze my eggs for now. Um, and thankfully, like we have good insurance coverage that covered a lot of it. So
Yeah.
we just went that route.
Okay. So that's interesting how you talked about how the doctors weren't listening to you because I think women complain about that a lot, especially black women. And just in general, I feel like women's health just isn't getting gotten taken seriously. It's always like, oh, maybe it's cramps, or it's just like, oh, it's your period. It's like not
Yeah.
taken seriously at all. So I was gonna ask how you recommend women start to advocate for themselves if they're in maybe they have a doctor that they feel isn't listening to their concerns, or just like how women can start to advocate for themselves when they go to a doctor.
Yeah, I think just based on my experience, I would have to say that you definitely have to speak up for yourself. Like, if something doesn't make sense, like for me, I was sitting there and I knew that I was in pain and I knew it was a cyst. I should have asked, you know what, I want to see the sonogram
Yeah.
pictures. Like, let me see it. Um, and tell them if they don't want to run tests or anything, like tell them to document it in your chart that they are refusing to run tests. And I think just do your own research so you could come with like questions
Mm.
and concerns. And if what they're saying maybe doesn't really make sense to you, you can say that you're going to go get a second opinion. I
Mm.
think sometimes that also makes doctors take you a little bit more serious, unfortunately, that you have to go that route.
Yeah.
And I think just really keep switching doctors. That is one thing I did, and I'm so glad that I just kept switching. And sometimes I would just make an appointment just to go and meet the doctor
Yeah.
and get a feel for them. And when you find a really good doctor, like make sure you tell them everything. Like even the little things that you may think are nothing. Like I had a hormone panel, like I was just doing everything because
Yeah.
I just thought like so many things could be wrong with me. But yeah, I think just speaking up for yourself, switch doctors if you feel like someone is not taking you seriously. Make sure that they are documenting um, if they're telling you like, oh no, like you're fine.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I came in with these concerns. Like, please document that you're
Yeah. Write
telling
it
me
down.
everything is fine. Yeah, and just go where you're actually like seen. And for me, it was important that it was someone of color, and I did feel seen, and I
Hmm.
feel like I was really taken seriously. So, whatever that looks like for you, it could be a male, it could be someone that, physically may not look like you, but just go where you feel seen. So I
Yeah.
think that's really the only
I like that. That's
advice
really
I
good
could have.
advice. Yeah, that's good advice. And let's talk about IVF. What is that process like? I think we see it a lot in movies or in media, and it's just the woman giving herself constant shots and then egg retrieval. And then I think they tell you, oh, you had enough eggs or something. And then the embryos happen. And then sometimes it doesn't fertilize. I don't know. I'm mixing up my
Yeah,
science terms, but walk us through the process from like step one to like the final step.
sure. So, step one obviously is seeing a specialist. Once you decide that you're going to go via IVF, there is an option for IUI also, which is not IVF. They kind of just put the sperm into your cervix and
Mm,
hopefully it takes, but very low results for that. So
yeah.
I went straight to IVF. And with IVF, so you start medication. A lot of times they will put you on birth control to try to regulate your cycle so that, or so they say, so that they can know when to give you the medication or
Yeah.
whatever. I refused it. I was off birth control for a while, so I felt like I don't want to go back on birth
Yeah.
control.
I feel you with that one.
So yeah, and I'm glad it worked out. So yeah, so you start the medication, which is shots, a lot of shots into your stomach every day for I think it took like 2 shots every night for maybe like 2 weeks
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
into your abdomen. Yeah, and then it's really a crazy feeling, at least for me, because I really started to feel really heavy in my like abdomen, like you feel really full,
Hmm.
and you have to keep going back to the doctor every other day for them to measure your eggs to make sure that there are eggs and everything is okay. They take your blood to make sure that your hormones are all right. So you do that every other day for the whole time. And then after the 2 weeks, I guess when you're like ready to ovulate, you take a trigger shot the night before. And then the next day, you go in and you have the retrieval. And the retrieval itself, you are like out for, I was asleep for like 15
Okay,
minutes.
so they put you to sleep.
Yeah, they put me to sleep for 15 minutes. It was a really quick process. And then you wake up and they tell you how many eggs they took out. I think for me, I had 22 eggs.
Okay.
And so I was like, oh, that's great. But in reality, after they take the eggs, they then, the next couple of days, they call you and tell you which ones were viable. Obviously, for me, I was doing embryos,
Hmm.
so my husband's sperm and my eggs were put together, and how many came together. So I went from 22 to 11
Oh, wow.
eggs.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was like, oh God. And then after that, I did genetic testing on them. So from there, they send them off. They freeze them, obviously,
Mm.
and they send them off to be tested. And then from there, I had four,
Oh, wow. And this is
which
when they
was,
were already embryos, right? And then they send it for genetic testing?
yeah, they sent it for genetic testing as embryos. We both did genetic testing, obviously, prior to IVF, like individually as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, they tested the embryos. And that was like really surprising to me because our genetic tests weren't.
Did they
Um,
say what the flags were? From going from 11 to 4 is a lot.
so apparently, like that's actually pretty normal, which
Mm.
I wouldn't think. Sometimes it's like maybe the egg or or the sperm just weren't really great quality. And then from there, so I had six, and two of them they said they couldn't tell like 100% if they were fine or not. And they said it could be like they call it cross. like basically like cross contamination
Mm,
maybe from other sperm,
okay.
but I didn't want to take the chance.
Yeah.
So yeah, I ended up with four that were like perfect. So, and yeah, that like took me for a loop because I was like, oh my gosh, I went from like 22 to four. Like, this
Yeah.
is horrible. Like, this is terrible. But like, when I did some research, like, it's pretty normal. And like, at the time, I was like on some like group chat or app with other going through the process, and they had similar numbers. So it seems like it's pretty normal.
Okay, so many questions. So, first of all, what are the shots supposed to do? Because you're taking shots for 2 weeks before you ovulate. So, what are the shots supposed to do?
So I guess the shots realistically you usually only ovulate with one egg. This makes you ovulate with multiple
Oh, okay.
eggs. And then it's like hormones to support it and
Okay.
also not have you prematurely ovulate.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. And then the trigger shot is for you to ovulate so they could take the eggs.
Okay. So, how long was the process from you first starting the shots to having your four embryos?
Um, Maybe like 3 weeks.
Oh, I thought you were going to say like 3 months. Okay. So,
No,
that's not
no.
long.
No, it's not long. Like once you start, it's really not long. Yeah,
Okay.
like you get on the meds. That's like a 2 week process, and then from there they release like do all the testing and everything with the embryos or the eggs like really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I really could have transferred like with like the next month, which a lot of people do. They like do it right away and then they get pregnant. But I also am like just like so it was so many, so many hormones, so much
Yeah.
medication. Like I just want my body to recover and like
Yeah.
take a break. But the next part of it from, what my doctor has told me is it will be oral medication, which is like estrogen, which I guess helps support your cervix for a baby. It prepares it. And then you take intramuscular shots into your buttocks for like weeks, like
Wow.
a lot of weeks, like maybe your whole first trimester, which is intense. So that's
Yeah,
another
I
reason I
didn't
was
know.
like, oh, I
Well, I
need a
guess
break.
because the egg didn't get fertilized in your body and your body had time to like prepare for it, it's like wanting to prepare your body and not shock it just by implanting a baby in there. So is that what all the shots and stuff are for?
So from what I've read, you can do an unmedicated transfer. It's just like you said, the maybe your body isn't ready for it,
Yeah.
and there's not a high chance. So my doctor did recommend a medicated cycle. But yeah, it just kind of supports the pregnancy
Hmm.
essentially. And then once you get off them, you're just pregnant. I mean,
Yeah.
you're pregnant either way, but yeah, you just take it for a long time. But I know that it's a lot to do
Hmm.
every single night or every single day, take shots and take medications. So yeah.
How do you feel emotionally now knowing that you have four embryos? Like, do you think about it every day? Like, do you remember you have four embryos there? Yeah, how do you just process it? Like when you're done, you have the four of them and it's like, okay, what next?
Yeah, I actually, for me, I don't think about it every day, but I feel like I think about it more like, oh my gosh, like I don't want four kids. Like,
Yeah.
what am I going to do with the excess? Like, I did not go through all that to just be like, chuck them,
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Does the doctor advise how long you should wait to keep embryos in storage? Is there any sort of correlation between how long you keep them and their health eventually?
Um, no, you know what? I don't know. My doctor didn't tell me about like health wise, how long keeping it may or may not affect it. But interestingly, I read an article of someone who got pregnant recently from like an embryo that was frozen like maybe 30, 40 years ago.
Okay, that's
So,
crazy.
yeah, I think it was like her mom's or it was someone in her family and she used it. But Yeah, it
Interesting. Oh, so it wasn't
yeah.
hers from 30 years ago. It was someone on her family. Oh, that's very
But
interesting.
yeah, so I'm assuming it's like frozen and
Science. Science, people.
yeah, science.
Okay.
But
So,
yeah.
how has this helped your decision making or sort of your timeline that you're working with? Do you have a timeline in mind? I know they say there's never a right time to like just decide to be a mom, like start like I'm ready today to be a mom.
hmm
But have you thought about your timeline at all? Do you still feel pressured? Are you still wanting to wait?
So I can't say that I feel pressured, but I do. It's just like I think it's natural to always think of like this biological clock. Um, so I've always said like okay, like maybe like by 35, but 35 is this year.
Mm-hmm.
So it is definitely something that I'm like strongly thinking of. More than likely I will do it this year, but yeah, I just feel like there's always, like you said, there's no good time. I feel like there's always something that comes up that I'm like, oh wait, I should do this after. I should do this after, or like I want
Yeah.
to do this, I want to do that. There's never gonna be like I could do that for the rest of my life. There's
Yeah.
never gonna be a good time. So,
And what do you think it means when some women are more like sort of your mindset, where it's like you don't feel rushed to do it? Like, you know, you're going to do it, but it's like, I don't need to do it this year or next year. And then there's some women, I'm sure you have a lot of friends or people in your family where it's like they were ready to become moms. They need to get pregnant this year. Now. Like, I need to have this. So, both of them will be great mothers. And just because one is not as super excited about it doesn't mean she doesn't want to be a mom. But I'm just wondering what sort of informs both mindsets.
so for me, like I'm a Caribbean, like I'm Haitian, so my family they're Caribbean. So right, they got married, had kids, bought the house. Like it was very like strategic, and it was very young. Like you're married now, you need to have kids. And and I hate to say this, but I just never wanted that life. Like it just seemed like it was always just working and like
Yeah.
slaving, and maybe that's just my experience and like what I've seen, but I'm like I want to enjoy life. Like I want to enjoy my youth. I don't want to have kids super young and then like I want to travel. I want to be able to have money to do things. Like when you're in your early 20s, you're broke. Like you don't
Yeah.
have money to do the things that you want to do. And I really didn't start like really enjoying and doing things until my 30s. Like I think my 30s have been so fun and
Yeah.
so great. And I'm glad that I didn't have children yet. So I feel like now being older, like, and having your kids, you've done the things, and it doesn't mean that you'll stop, but you may have less of that, like, at least for me, like less of that feeling of like, oh, I'm missing out, or I didn't get to do this, or I didn't get to do that. I
Yeah.
don't know. And I also feel like you kind of are more settled. Like, I wanted to make sure, like, and this was a actually part of another question you asked me, like the conversations I had with my husband. Like, I
Hmm.
wanted to make sure that we financially,
Yeah.
like, can have kids in the way that I want. Like, I want to have a home. Like, I want us to be able to hire help if we need it. I
Yes.
don't want to be struggling. Like, I don't know. It's just these things were really important to me. So now, if we're in a place that we can, like, if I need help, we can hire help. If we need, like, to pay for basketball camp, we could pay for it,
I love
and
that.
we could
Yeah.
still travel and still have fun. Then I feel like I'm in a better place mentally and for my mental health to be able to, you know, be a
Yeah.
mother.
And you're just being intentional about it, which is my own personal gripe. Sometimes I'm like, did you actually think about this? Like, I see people get married and have kids like a second later. And I'm like, that's great if you guys thought, like, you thought this through. Like, was this part of the plan? Because I think a lot of times a lot of women still don't realize they have a choice too, by the way. I think social media has helped, especially recently on TikTok. I've been seeing more moms being honest about motherhood and their experience, whereas a few years ago either they didn't talk about it or it was sort of frowned upon for a mom to be like, this sucks and it's hard. But now women are being more open, like saying like it's really hard being a mom. Some moms are open about even feeling regret and things like that, which is still taboo today to express, but especially back then was taboo. So I think social media has helped people see different lifestyles. Like I even had someone on my podcast, Dominique, who was like decided at 29 that she didn't want to have kids and has stuck by it. So that's someone that I saw on Instagram and I was like, oh my God, I've never really heard someone say this. Wow, this is an option. So I think that's really helped. So it's good to be intentional, like you said, because it's like, okay, I want to be a mom, but this is how I want to do it. And I'm going to wait till I can do that. That's really important.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And like you said, like I think there's like this taboo on women, like if they say they don't want kids, and it's like that's okay too. Like you can choose to live your life how
Yeah.
you want it, whether you want to wait, whether you want to have them really young, or if you don't want children at all, like that's okay. I feel like there's just this big taboo against like women, like you have to have kids and you need to get married to have kids right away, and no.
Yeah. Good advice. Is there anything that surprised you at all throughout the IVF journey or just like this whole journey to becoming a mom that has surprised you?
Um, I would say maybe the only thing that surprised me is really how like much like it is on your like physical body and your mental health too. I can imagine like, you go through all of this and it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work,
Yeah.
and sometimes people go through multiple
Mm-hmm.
rounds, and I could only imagine like having to do this multiple times would be a lot. So I just think like that's just something I thought about, like wow, this is really a lot, and it's such a intentional decision that it really needs to be a decision for yourself.
Yeah. And I know you work in the legal field, so let's just talk about the legal aspects really quickly, as far as you know. But I've seen some cases online where maybe a couple is no longer together, they get a divorce or things like that, and you have embryos, and it's like, what are we going to do with them? Like maybe the mom, wants to get rid of two of them. Maybe they already used two of them or things like that. And the husband's like, no, you can't get rid of them. Or there's just like a custody battle over embryos. So how can women protect themselves? Like when you were starting the process, did they make you sign anything with your husband about what if you guys are no longer together? What
Yeah.
happens? Yeah.
Yeah, so that's definitely something that at least a good IVF doctor like kind of also just it comes with that. So we did get like forms, like legal forms, of who would be responsible or if we wanted just discard them if we were no longer together. And that's a conversation I had with my husband, and I'm like, I'm going through all this. These are mine. Like I don't care
I have
what
custody.
happens. Yeah, I have custody. Like, So yeah, that's what I did. We both signed that if anything happens, whether we get divorced or if he were to pass away, it would be um my decision as to what I do with them, and I could use them with or without him.
Okay, good. So that's an important aspect to definitely have ironed out before you start the process. What are some
Yeah.
other questions that women should ask themselves before they begin IVF just to make sure that it's the right step for them at that right moment? Maybe they've asked the right questions or had the right conversations with their partner. Like what should they make sure, like a sort of checklist before they know they're ready to get started?
Um, I would say the one thing I would say to do is before you go and like rush into it is really check out all your options, because there are like depending on what your issue is. For me, because the way to fix my issue would have been an invasive surgery, I didn't want to do that, and it could have resulted in me, still having scar tissue and still
Mm.
being in the same position. But yeah, just look into all your options and see multiple doctors, like get multiple opinions. And I did that. I went to multiple IVF doctors. I got multiple opinions. And when everyone kind of said the same thing for me, I was like, okay, I'm more comfortable in knowing that this is probably the right thing to do. And I think just honestly, maybe go to therapy and really just talk through the possibilities, because I think sometimes, or at least for me, I think like when I thought of IVF, it was like, oh, you just do it and you're pregnant. But it's like after speaking to so many people that have gone through it, like multiple times, and it didn't happen or they miscarried, like it's so much on your mental
Mm.
and your physical health that I think it's good to just kind of prepare yourself for those possibilities and um yeah, get some therapy.
Yeah, therapy is always good. How was your support system throughout the process? Did you tell some of your friends? How can someone support their friend going through that? Like, how did you feel?
I think everyone is different, so it's hard for me to answer that. For me, I'm not someone that shares too much, so I really kind of kept it to myself. Like, I didn't even tell my parents. So I really, because I feel like a lot of times, like the questioning
Mm,
around children, whether you're dating or you're married, it's like, when are you going to do this? Or why aren't you doing this? When, and I've set a lot of boundaries
mm,
for myself where it's like, you're not stressing me out. Like, I don't want to talk about this every single day. You can ask me 100 times. And I actually told everyone, like, oh no, I'm just not having kids. So they would stop asking.
yeah,
Like, so I feel like it depends on the person. Like for me, I felt like sharing a lot of the details, like, oh, I'm going to do this. Not that you can't share. Like I did, like people knew that I
yeah,
was going to do this, but like maybe the time frames, like, oh, I'm going to go to the doctor next week and start this. Then I felt like people would be constantly like saying like, oh, like, where are you in the
yeah. Checking
process?
in.
What's
Yeah,
going on? What's going on? And for me, that's very overwhelming and like stressful. So I didn't share like the entire process. But I think just being there however your friend needs, if it's just checking in, like, oh, how did it go? Or if they are like going through the process and you know that maybe their partner isn't able to give them the shots, like offered to do it for them, that
mm,
would be really helpful if they don't have someone to do it. But yeah.
that makes sense. No, it definitely makes sense when you know your friends have the best intentions, but it'll be too overwhelming if they keep on checking, especially since you're going through such an emotional process. But you
Yeah.
mentioned something that's a great segue to my question, which is telling or setting boundaries for family in your business. So first it's like, when are you getting married? When are you getting married? And then you get married. And then it's like the kids conversation, which
Hmm.
people start talking and making jokes about right from the wedding day. Like, oh, you're going to have twins. I want you to blah, blah, blah. So
Hmm.
how do you set those boundaries? Like when they ask, like, what do you say? And did you get any pressure from, cause I know you mentioned you're Haitian, cause even being Nigerian, a lot of time it will be the guy's mom who's all up in your business, like, when are you going to start trying? When are you giving me grandkids? When are you giving my son kids? So how do you deal
Hmm.
with that? Because that's different. Because your parents, you can sort of be like, leave me alone. But like, how do you deal with it
Hmm.
when it's coming from the in-laws?
So that's funny. So I'm like grateful to have a mother-in-law that's not very like
We
in
love
my
that.
business.
We love that.
Yeah, so I'm really glad. But she has also made it very clear, like she can't wait for grandkids. She can't wait for grandkids. I think that for me, the boundary was like when we got married, then yeah, the questions like, when are you gonna have kids? When are you gonna have kids? When are you gonna have kids? And I would initially just kind of brush it off and be like, oh, eventually, eventually. And then like just I got annoyed and I was like, oh, I don't know. We're never going to have them. I don't think we're going to have them. And I think for me and my family, like people are so shocked and like taken aback by that. They're like, oh, I guess they don't want kids.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's something that it's hard when it's your family to be like, don't ask me that. But it is really like such an invasive question
It is.
because you don't know what the couple is going through. It could be a situation where they can't
Mm-hmm.
have kids, or it could just be like they're not ready, they're not there, you know.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's so invasive.
it is. Did they ask your husband those sort of questions? How did he handle it differently, or how did he feel about
Yeah.
those questions?
He's a lot nicer than I am, so he'll always kind of say like, "Yeah, we want kids." Or sometimes he would tell people like, "Oh yeah, we're trying." And I'd be like, "No, we're not. Like, don't tell these people that."
Don't lie to
Um,
these people.
yeah. Like, I don't like I'm just a lot more private, but Yeah, and the one thing I did do through the IVF process, I did ask him not to share with anyone, because I just kind of wanted to be able to process
Yeah.
and get through it, myself.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
How have you felt about him throughout this process? Because I know a lot of times, like, women have said either notice negatives or positives from going through fertility and even going through parenting. So it could be like, oh my God, I love him even more. Like, I saw a different side of him. How did you feel throughout the process? Did you feel supported? Was there anything he did that you really appreciated that maybe stood out? Like, how did you feel overall?
I definitely felt supported. He did make sure to be like, even if he had like work events or whatever, he made sure to be home to give me the shot. He knew like, I probably wasn't feeling my best or whatever, and he really just took care of like me cooking, cleaning, and making sure like everything was good. So, yeah, I was definitely appreciative of that and him just kind of prioritizing that. Although we're both going through it, like I'm really going through it.
They were really the one going through it. Okay, we love that. Love a
Right.
supportive husband. How
Hmm.
do you feel about older mothers? I've seen TikToks like the 40 plus mom crew. They look like they're having a great time to me personally. But then some people scare them in the comments like you're going to be like old at your kid's high school graduation or things like that, which I'm like, I don't know why you guys are thinking that far. Like, kids probably going to have a great time because parents are older, they're happy, and they have more money to spoil them. But how do you feel
Yeah.
in general? Is age like a concern for you? Like, how old am I going to be when I start or things like that?
No. I feel like I said, I feel like being able to live life a little bit before having kids is ideal.
Yeah.
I feel like being more set to have your kids and like be able to provide them with everything that you want to give them and that they need, is ideal. Like to me, it's an ideal situation. And also, like my dad, I have two little brothers. My dad remarried and had children in his 50s.
Mm,
And so, they're now going to high school. My dad is parenting and taking them to the games and doing all the things. And I've also like, I grew up with my grandma on my
mm,
mom's side, who had my mom very late.
mm.
And thankfully, I had my grandma until she was like 95.
Amazing.
So I feel like live life, do whatever, and then have your kids. And I also read an article that the later you have children for women, the later the maternal age is, the longer you live.
Oh, interesting. That's a
Yeah.
great article.
Hmm. So listen, have them late and live life.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Okay, so now that you've gone through all of that, how are you sort of putting self-care back in? Because I know that was very taxing on you. I know it was a while ago, but how do you incorporate self-care into your routine?
So I have to be honest that like I'm not like a self-care routine kind of girl. I feel like I've just really honestly over the last few years prioritized peace,
Mm,
and boundaries. Like I don't let people stress me, family, because like family can stress you
yes.
out. um, Work, like I'm gonna work hard. I'm gonna do what I'm gonna have to do, but I'm not working like 100 hours a week. And I just do fun things.
But that's self-care,
So
like especially boundary setting. I
yeah,
think that's self-care for yourself. Like it's not just like going to the spa. It's like setting
yeah.
boundaries on our work and people. So that's actually really healthy. That's a great routine.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like that's been the best thing, like boundaries and just like prioritizing peace.
Okay. And what advice would you have for maybe anyone who is sort of trying to figure out if they want to become a mom, feels like confused, feels like maybe they're gonna impact their career, just all the feelings that you go through before deciding what journey to embark
Hmm.
on. Like how would you recommend they get their mind into a clear space to make a decision?
So for me, the way I actually like really finalized my decision is that one of my mom's best friends never had any children. And I saw her at like some event, and we were just talking, and she started like tearing up because she asked me about kids, and I was like, oh, eventually one day, whatever. And she started tearing up, and she was like, yeah, she's like, I wish I had children. And I was like, really? And she's like, yeah, by the time I tried, it was like too late. And I was like, well, why, didn't you adopt or do anything? And she's like, I don't know why she didn't adopt, but she was like, she just felt like it wasn't meant to be anymore. And she had a partner,
Mm.
and to me, she lives like an amazing, like fun life. But she just felt like now that she's older, she regrets not having done it at all, or
Yeah.
at least having things in place like freezing your eggs or
Yeah.
whatever. And I think for the only advice I would have is to just try to envision like your future self when you're like 50. And do you see like kids around? Like, do you see, and they don't have to be like adults, they could be
Mm-hmm.
little kids. You could have a little baby in your 50s. But do you see kids around? Like, do you feel like you would be missing out on something if you didn't? And maybe it's not like have a child right now. Maybe it's just like freeze your eggs.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I saw someone say like, but a good way to also think about it is ask yourself like, is this something I would still want to do? Like if I imagine myself raising a child alone, would I still want to do it? Because again, anything can happen to your partner. Like, we don't want bad things to happen. But if it does and you're doing it by yourself, is this something you want to do? And some women said that helped them decide because they're like, yeah, I definitely don't want to do it by myself. Or they're like, yeah, I would still want to do it by myself.
Yeah,
But I think something that I think about a lot, especially I get so affected by like the news cycle and just like when I see things happen, especially with this recent plane crash, and I keep seeing all the stories about the victims on the plane, and I'm like, life is so random. Like I feel like it just doesn't life doesn't make any sense. So sometimes I'm like, would I be wanting to bring a child actively into this world that's messed up? Or like you can give it your all, do your best, and then something random happens
I know.
and there's a lot. So I don't know. It's just a lot to think about. So sometimes I wonder when I see people become moms, like, do y'all not get scared by the news? Do you not think about what could happen in 10 years? Or some people be having badass kids. Like you could have
I know.
kids and they don't like you. They go through stuff. They don't, they turn out crazy. So I feel like having a kid is such a big gamble. You have no idea
It
who you're
is.
going to get, what their personality is going to be like, what's going to happen to them, what's going to happen to you. So it just feels like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of, I'm like, right now, I just want to control the variables in my space and like bringing someone else in there is a lot for me to. So I'm curious to see how my thinking evolves as I get older. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm definitely, yeah, it's a no for
No,
right
those are
now.
all those are all really good. No, those are really all good questions. These are all things I've like brought up even with my husband. I'm like, what if we have a baby and they're like a serial killer?
Yeah,
Like, is
exactly. Because serial killers had moms. Like there were babies, cute babies once too.
that right? So I'm like, these are all like so like there's so many possibilities, like you said, or so many tragedies,
Yeah,
or just so many hard situations with kids. It's not always like a happy, cute baby.
yeah,
Sometimes there's a lot of challenges. It's a lot to think about.
yeah. Okay, well, I didn't want to end on a sad note or talking about serial killer babies. So let's just end with one piece of advice you have for anyone just trying to make it in life. It could just be anything, like your piece of advice.
My piece of advice would be to just like put yourself out there, do the things that you feel like you can't do because you'll surprise yourself. You'll do it and you'll be great at it.
I love that. Thank you, Kat. Your first podcast episode, and you're amazing.
Yay! Yes, first one in the books.
Yes.
Hopefully I get invited back.
Yes, you'll be getting a repeat guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you.